and welcome to Understanding Narrative in Photography, the first of three podcasts tonight, tomorrow, and Thursday evenings, being done in association in association with Kirkcudbright Galleries. My name is Kim Ayres. I'm a photographer based in Scotland, and what these podcasts are about is currently in the Kirkcudbright Galleries. In the Mitchell Gallery are several photos from the McKinnon Collection. Now, the McKinnon Collection were a series of 14,000 photos collected by Murray McKinnon, which date from around the 1850s until, well, pretty much the 1950s. There's about a century's worth of photographs. These were recently acquired by a joint thing between the National Galleries Scotland and the National Library of Scotland, and some of them are going out on tour. At the Kirkcudbright Galleries, there's roughly about sort of 3 dozen or so photos there. So, it kind of inspired by this collection of photos, Kirkcudbright Galleries have decided to do a competition to create a kind of Kirkcudbright collection as such. And so these podcasts are here to help kind of inspire ideas and thoughts about how you might go around creating photos that would work for a collection. I mean, in this day and age, we live in a very kind of disposable photo culture. We take our photos, it goes up in Instagram, people scroll through it, they spend 2, maybe 3 seconds, if we're really lucky, on the photo, possibly quite a lot less. And then it's gone, it's forgotten. But there's something different about a printed photograph. When we hold it in our hands, we respond to it differently. And then if we stick it in a frame and put it on a wall, we look at it very differently again. So what would a modern kind of photo collection look like? So this is part of the idea behind the competition being held by the Kirkcudbright Galleries. Now, if I haven't done it already, I will put the link to the competition in the description of the video. So do check it out afterwards. Regardless of whether you're interested in taking part in the competition, hopefully you might find some of these podcasts useful. So tonight, and it's tonight as in the UK time. If you're in Americas, it's sometime in the afternoon, and if you're over in Asia, it's very early hours indeed. So today I'm going to be talking about narrative, the notion of storytelling in photography. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about composition, and on Thursday I'm going to be talking about light. So please do tune into as many of these as you can. Now, right now, if you are watching this live, leave me a comment to let me know you're here. The chat is open. If you have any questions, if you have any observations or comments, let me know. But meanwhile, say hello, let me know where you're from, and I hope you enjoy the next half an hour or so. I can see there's some comments in here already. Oh, Pat is saying, I'm here, good luck. I know Pat's down in Somerset. Meg is saying, good evening, everyone. Jim says, hi, Kim, and all from Dumfries. Gary says, hello. Maggie says, good evening, everyone. And Rosemary, who's hailing from the Pacific West of America, says, hello, all. John is saying, hello, Kim from Columbus, Ohio. Keith is saying, good evening, all. And Roy is saying, hello. I think Roy's in Yorkshire. So that's great. We've already started to get a little spread of people from various places around the world, which is absolutely wonderful. So, okay, now let's have a little talk then about the notion of narrative in photography. So what do I mean by narrative? So narrative storytelling. So the thing is, essentially, I mean, there's many ways you can divide photography up, but for the sake of this argument, I'm going to divide it. There's 2 kinds of photos. There's narrative photos and there are snapshots. And snapshots, we all know what snapshots are. Snapshots are disposable photos. They are photos where you take a quick photo and it tells you everything you need to know in that photo. So here's a photo of my lunch. Here's a photo of my cat. Here's a photo of me and the wife on holiday. It's not intended to be anything more than perhaps a little bit of documentation of whatever it is you've taken a photo of, where you are, and it's just a kind of, there it is. Now, a narrative photo is the idea of story, that when you look at it, you feel that there's more to the photo going on than just the immediate content that you can see. So we start to get caught up in maybe, well, I wonder what was happening just before that photo was taken, or what was going to happen just after it was taken, or what was happening out with the borders of the photo. If you see a photo of somebody and they go, you kind of wonder what they're responding to, what's over there. So as such, a narrative photo tends to grasp the attention a lot more. And if you are interested in taking your own photos, then starting to learn narrative and understanding this notion of storytelling in photography becomes really important, because it's all the difference between somebody scrolling past on your Instagram feed or Facebook feed in a matter of half a second and somebody pausing for a moment and taking a look. So a couple more people in here. Oh, Pat saying, must remember how to pronounce Kirkcudbright. Who knew? Yes, for anybody who's out with, who hasn't actually been to the area, it does look like Kirkcudbright, but yeah, locally pronounced Kirkcudbright. Oh, Nicola says, hi, Kim, glad you can make it, Nicola. And Brian also says, hi all from Dumfries. Okay, so what do I want to talk about then? So let's get some examples then of a few photos. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few photos of my own. I call myself a portrait and a narrative photographer, so I kind of specialise in this idea of narrative photography. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer to some of the photos that from the McKinnon Collection that are on display in Kirkcudbright, and talk you through a little bit about that idea of storytelling. And hopefully what this will do is inspire you a little bit to think about how you might set about taking photos yourself if you were wanting to sort of create your own photo that was worthy of being put into a collection that might be being printed up in a gallery 100 years from now. Oh, we also have Horses Videos Volpa. Says, hi Kim, I've remembered. Oh, that's great. That's somebody who's turned up for the... is it Diane? I'm trying to remember. Always one of these problems. People's YouTube handles aren't always the same as their own name, so I can never really keep track of everybody. Anyway, so yes, what I want to do, let's throw up a photo or two. So here's an idea then, of a photo that's very much a kind of in the style of a painting. This is one I did called Artists at the Nail Factory. It was commissioned specifically for a gallery called the Nail Factory in Dalbeattie, and what they wanted was a photo full of the artists who were actually exhibiting there at the time. And so what we did here was we created this photo based using the same kind of tropes and styles of traditional narrative painting. So what we have here is we have a group of people, we've got a group of artists, they're all around a table. Tables are always great objects to sort of, because you get the feeling that there's something happening. There's a community, there's a discussion going on. And as we look around the photo, we've got jewellers and glass artists and people talking to each other. We've got a potter here showing off his pot, little wee baby sitting on mother's lap. We've got an artist with his paintbrushes sticking out of his pocket. We've got a sculptor here working in stone. We've also got a willow sculptor over here. We've got food on the table. Not big meal, but kind of snacky food. And so there's this sense of an event happening, something going on, something worth our time to sort of look at and kind of ponder. Maybe we kind of wonder what it would be like if we were sitting in it ourselves, or we might wonder who these people are, or maybe we might even know some of them. So that's one kind of a staged narrative photo. That's where what's happened here is all the people have been put in place specifically to create a particular kind of photo, a staged narrative photo. Let's talk about another kind of photo. Here then, have I got, yep, click on this one. So this one then, this is Andrew Livingston, who's a tailor in Castle Douglas. And this photo was taken for, specifically for a magazine, Dumfries and Galloway Life. And we have a picture of Andrew standing outside his tailor's shop. Now, in this sense, it's a portrait, but there's also a kind of narrative idea behind it. You're not just randomly taking a photo of a person, randomly standing in front of a shop. He is standing in front of his own shop, of a tailor's. He is the fourth generation tailor that goes back over 100 years to his great-great-grandfather who founded the business. Now, part of what happens here is, at first glance, you have man standing outside shop. But there's actually multiple layers within this. So it's not just he standing in front of the shop. You can see the shop window. You can see through the shop window, and you can actually see some of these tailor's dummies. So behind him, in his very well turned out suit, you've got the suits in the shop behind. But then there's a third layer here, which is actually the reflections in the window. Because if we look at some of these reflections here, you can also see the buildings. The window's curved, and so it creates this sort of shape up here where it comes up and then curves down on the other side here. And there's something about the shape of these roofs, which if you recognise kind of small town Scottish architecture, you're kind of familiar with what it is. It doesn't tend to look so English, it doesn't tend to look so European. Mainland European. So in essence then what we've got here is we've got a photo, but we've got layers to it, and that's really what starts to create the narrative. Let's flick back here for a moment. I will just periodically just check back into to see whether there are any extra comments. Oh, and so it is Diane says yes. Right, okay, so I've remembered the name right. Okay, so as I say, feel free to join in the comments. If you have any observations or questions, then throw them into the comments, and I will keep periodically checking back in to see if there's anything I need to respond to. So, though we've got that kind of photo, we've got staged photos, we've got whether that's a whole group of people or we've got somebody posing, and we get a lot of these kind of photos. So you'll see some more like this actually in the original collection when I come to it. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of fully staged bit like we have here. You take a photo like this. Now, in this case, Alice, she's camped overnight and making her morning coffee. I'm firing off a few shots. And we've got a trailer over in the background. We've got a tent in the background. We've got a little fire. We've got the coffee pot. There's a cigarette hanging out of the mouth. So here there's a sense of something going on. You're looking at this, you can almost smell that kind of damp early morning air when you've been camping. The little bit of warmth coming from the fire, the smell of the coffee as it's starting to brew. And so this then becomes, again, it's a storytelling photo. There's a sense of a story going on. We don't necessarily know the whole story. We don't know why she's been camping. We don't know where she's going, why she's here, even what kind of coffee she likes particularly. But there's a sense of something bigger than just what we can see. So if let's try another photo here. This one here, hair is being done, but it's not. But you can see bits plaited. You can see the young girl laughing away. They're obviously joking with each other, having fun. There's beautiful light. There's sunlight behind, but it's not just kind of getting a bit of plaited hair. They've got little antlers. They've got deer horns being sort of tied into their hair as well. So again, you're kind of thinking, well, I wonder what's going on here. What's the story going on? There's obviously clearly fun to be had, and it's beautiful light, and that warm kind of laughter on the face. You see the face, you always can't help but feel a smile coming up. But then you also kind of start to wonder what else is going on. So this notion of narrative photography, you are telling a story, or you are hinting at a bigger story. Recently, I was in the Kirkcudbright galleries doing some photos, a kind of day in the life idea, and I took this photo. And with this photo, what I've done is I've got the camera on a tripod and it's sitting there on something like a 4-second exposure. Now, across the period of 4 seconds, we've got these two people sitting on the left here who are watching a screen. They're watching. This is the Galloway hoard, a Viking. Discovery of a Viking hoard of silver and jewels and amazing stuff, which is also on display currently at the Kirkcudbright galleries. And as well as some of the items, they've got little TVs with videos telling you all about the amazing discoveries and how things were found and some of the stories behind them. So in the space of 4 seconds, these two have been just latched onto the TV. They haven't moved. This guy here, looking at this pot, he's been looking down, and during that 4 seconds has stood up again. And we've got this wonderful kind of sense of movement going on. This woman here is obviously just moved into place. We can partially see through the background. If we look over here, this guy has become very ghostly indeed. And in fact, if we look down here, there's another ghostly set of footsteps, feet rather, where presumably for less than a second, I went click, and then the person who was standing there moved out of shot. So what we've got here is we've got a whole set where you've got several different people going on. We're inside a set. Your eye can take the time to kind of move around the picture and kind of explore what's going on. You don't necessarily take in everything in that first half a second. Or we can take it outside, where you can go for the absolute snapshot. Well, again, I was saying avoiding snapshot, but that notion of an instant, an absolute instant. So this is taken actually out of the window. So what we have here is, it is absolutely lashing down with rain. We have the lollipop man stepping out into the road. He's got his bright jacket on, the stop sign. We've got schoolgirl coming. She's got a dog on a lead. And just behind, somewhere else, looks like probably another dog on a lead from somebody sort of sitting back behind there. And here we have a sense of movement, a sense of something happening. And so stories can be very static, and they can be very, created and put in place, or they can be capturing a moment in time where you really feel that sense of moment. And really what you're trying to do with the idea of narrative photography is to get the viewer to feel, to either start thinking and imagining what's going on, or to have that sense of, we know what this wet day is like. How many of us can actually remember all those times walking home from school in the pouring rain? So if it's triggering something in the mind of the viewer, then that's where you're onto something. So that gives you a little start of a couple of the images that I've got. Okay, question here. Roy says, what determines whether you use colour or black and white for these images? Okay, that's an interesting one. And to a certain extent, it's colour or black and white is a kind of an aesthetic choice. Some photos, like if you had when you've got the guy in the bright yellow, the lollipop man, in the bright yellow and orange jacket, if you put that in black and white, you would miss part of the impact of the photo. Whereas black and white, very often what black and white does is, because you remove the colour, you're kind of going semi-abstract in a way. You're abstracting, you are removing something. And there's something quite timeless about the notion of black and white photography. Maybe it's because we grew up with the idea of a lot of old photos are black and white. You sort of kind of feel that you're moving slightly more into the realm of art very often with black and white photos. You're making a statement. You're not just saying, here is what I happen to look at today, or in this moment. I looked at it and I've edited this now, because unless there's very, very few cameras, we don't talk about having analog cameras now with black and white filming. A handful of artists do, but that's not every day. The everyday is the phone. We whip out our phone and and these automatically take in colour, unless you specifically go in and set up black and white settings. Most photos are taken in colour, and then in order to make them into black and white, you have to do an editing process. So you're going through a mental process. So when we look at black and white photos, we know they have been edited and printed and time has been taken with them, or we tend to look at them in a slightly different way. Whether the photo needs the colour or works better in black and white these days tends to be an aesthetic choice. And it's one of those things, you have that choice, because you can take the photo in colour, you can put it into an editing program, put it in black and white, and then see. Check for yourself. Does it work better in colour? Does it work better in black and white? And if you find that you've got a preference, present it in that way. Rosemarie says, the action captured at the gallery invites so many questions and thoughtful observations of the photo. I love that. Excellent. I'm glad you said that. That it makes me feel like I'm on the right track then, having done that. Right, okay, what I want to do now then is I want to show you some of the photos from the McKinnon Collection, which I feel have quite a strong sort of narrative element to them, so that we can, again, inspire you to hopefully think about ways you would approach narrative in your photography. So let's start with this wonderful one here. Oh, not that one. I want to do Sorry, just find the right. There we go. So this one is James Rennie, butcher in Edinburgh. Unknown photographer. They reckon probably about 1925 for this photo. I'll just zoom in a little bit here, crop off that bottom part here. And wow, what a butcher. Now, we have 3 butchers in Castle Douglas, and I've never seen any of them with all the meats hanging outside. Now, I suppose so this is a stage, you know, much like my tailor in front of his window, you have the butcher in front of his shop with all these meats hanging down. And, you know, we kind of wonder, if we look down here, there's a lot of scratches. Are these little scratches and dirt marks on the photo? Is it flies buzzing around? There's a lot of, you kind of end up with a lot of questions, I suppose, and a lot of the questions come from the fact that we are so far removed. We don't see a situation like this every day. But obviously the photographer took this photo because even back then you didn't necessarily see this every day. The reason it becomes an interesting photo. So you've got the butcher there, you've got all his wares, and presumably it hasn't just been put out just to take the photo, because all these hooks that it's hanging off, these big bars, they look like they're fitted. These are fitted, ready for this. This is obviously happens a lot. Whether it happens every day or it only happens on delivery day, I don't know. But it's really quite fascinating. It draws us into the world, wondering what it's like. So I think there is a kind of tradition of taking photos of the shop owner, the business owner, outside the front of their business. So that's maybe always an approach you can think of. Let's take a look at another one. Now this one, this is taken in your typical high street photographers. This is, what did we say? This is taken by an Alexander Ross, and it reckoned roughly about 1900 is this photo was taken. So 122 years ago. And at this point, photography is becoming much more popular. You now have high street photographers. People would go and get their photos taken. And what I love about this one is that, I mean, we all know what that kind of traditional family photo is like, or the passport photo, or the school photo. But here, this woman has decided that she is going to show herself as a golfer. And so she's got the golf clubs down, but she's holding one. She's I guess, with the nice kind of woolen jumper, cardigan. You know, maybe this is what she actually wears out on the golf course as well. And in a way, there's almost a sense of, although she's not taking the photo of herself, she's employed somebody to take the photo of her. It's almost tapping into that kind of selfie thing that we do today. We take photos of ourselves, and the reason we do that is because we wish to present ourselves in a certain way. We can present ourselves either in whatever way we wish to be seen, and we may wish to be seen in a way that we think of ourselves that we are, or maybe we're just trying to project an absolute fantasy. We will never know whether this woman was a genuine golfer, whether she borrowed a friend or a husband's golf kit and just decided to go there to have a bit of a laugh or to shock somebody, or there's all sorts of unanswered questions with this. But the fact is, it's not just a standard portrait. Okay, let's just take a quick look. Okay, so Pat, a couple of comments about the butcher shot. Pat says hygiene went out the window in those days, and Jim says, would the butcher shot have the same impact without the butcher? Do narratives always need people? Now that's a really good question, Jim. And no, I don't think you necessarily need people in it. You can get away with animals, dead animals on their own. If it was the butcher shot without the butcher, I think really a lot depends on the story you're telling. I mean, you can have story. If you think of a volcano erupting, that's maybe something happening in action. Generally speaking, what you're trying to do with a narrative photo is the idea of somebody imagining and placing themselves in that scenario, or a sense of anticipation. what's going to come next or what's just happened. I think what you're trying to think of is that notion that this is a scene from a story, a film still, a moment from a theatre production, a moment captured in the street. And I think, generally speaking, it's probably much easier to do with people in it, on one level at any rate. So hopefully that gives you a little bit to think about. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more photos here. Now, if we're talking about staged narrative photo again, I have to say I do absolutely love this one. This one was taken at Loch Trool, and it's called the Loch Trool Boating Party. And this is a stage setup. Now, there's all sorts of strange things about this. I have to say, I absolutely, as somebody who does stage narrative photography, this photo has a huge appeal to me because I can imagine what it's like being the photographer trying to arrange this photo. We have the oarsman here looking with his hands on his oars, looking like he is just this second landed. They've landed, but that is completely offset by the fact that the guy drinking the champagne is actually sitting on the boat. So unless he decided to sit down at the very moment the boat came in, highly unlikely, especially if he's had more than one slug of that champagne, that's been set up. Over here we have the Countess of Galloway. She's holding a gun and she's pointing it off, not quite at the photographer, which is a bit of a relief, but obviously just over his shoulder. He's obviously not caring what she's pointing the gun at. He's too busy with his champagne. Here we have the rest. These four, they're all looking at the camera with varying degrees of hostility. Certainly these two women at the back are giving the photographer the absolute look of death. Now, whether that they just think he's taking too long, whether they're looking down their nose at the photographer because the photographer is obviously a kind of a tradesman and not of the upper classes that the rest of them appear to be, again, we will never know. But in terms of stage narrative photo, it's intriguing. A lot of thought has gone into the creating of the photo, but we don't necessarily know a great deal more about it. Different kind of photo then if we go here. Skycrafters planting potatoes. This one is reckoned to be around about 1886. The Loch Trool Boating Party was reckoned to be about 1888. So similar kind of time, entirely different class system of people. So whereas we have the upper classes and their boating party, with this one we have the potato planters out in the field, the crofters on Skye, living a real hand-to-mouth existence. Now, what's interesting here, the first thing we notice is, well, generally speaking, it's the guy looking straight at us. Have they been asked to pause and pose for the photo? Has he just paused particularly to take a look at the cameraman? But the women here, it looks like she's planting seaweed. So seaweed is being dug into the ground, presumably to help kind of put the nutrients into the soil. We can see this woman here with her basket full of seaweed. This guy here, I don't know whether he's waiting for her to put some in before he starts doing a bit more digging. These are kind of real, almost like sort of hand plows in a way. So here what we're doing is we're capturing that moment of life, moment of it's going on, it's happening. There is a pause though for the photographer to stop and take his photo. He's obviously asked if it's okay to take his photo, or maybe they've gone out into the field to pose. We'll never fully know, but in terms of narrative, there is this sense of a story, of something going on. So let's just... any more questions? Pat says, oh look, the women are doing the work. What a surprise. Yes. The men can stand around and tell them what to do. Okay, yeah, there's another women doing the work in a couple of photos time. Yeah, I think you're quite like Pat. Okay, so let's flick on then to, let's get into some sports, because sports photography is another one where you're kind of capturing a moment in action. And with this one is called women's women's charity football match taken in the 1930s. And this one is all about that anticipation, the moment before a dramatic moment happens. Now, this woman's got her leg up. She's obviously either about to kick the ball or has just kicked the ball. But actually, we can see she's about to kick the ball. You wouldn't really stand like that if the ball... And the woman to her right here, clearly the goalie, she's got gloves on her hands. She's diving to grab the football. Her eyes are closed in a moment of anticipation as she comes to grab it. As this woman is bringing her leg up to kick the ball, as this woman is leaping out to grab it, this is going to end in pain. We don't know what happened next, but it's not going to be comfortable. Somebody's going to get quite hurt. Somebody's going to twist their leg, or somebody's going to end up with football spikes in their arm. But there's such a sense of energy and action. And if you're creating these kind of action shots, if you're capturing sports going on, then that notion of movement that becomes a very strong narrative. You really do feel like you are part of an ongoing saga, an ongoing story, and we just know one moment of it. So to be able to capture that moment just before something happens is very often as powerful, or even slightly more powerful, than if you actually get the action itself, the moment just before they kick the ball, rather than when the ball is actually being kicked. As such, a very different sports photo is this one, curling. Now this curling one, where have we got? Strathmore curlers defeat the Thaw. It was taken in 1935. What's interesting here is that the photographer is right down at the same level as the curling stone. It must be lying on the ice. Now presumably he's not as close as we feel. We feel like we're sort of right up there, just a few inches away from the stone. I'm guessing, yeah, I mean, they couldn't be doing their curling if they were trying to sort of get the stones running, and there's a photographer who might end up with one straight in his face. So presumably he's lying much further back, possibly on a mat or something, so he's not freezing on the ice, but he's got a big zoom lens, and a zoom lens is getting us in closer. But you get this real, by being down so low, you get this real sense of action. And also the shutter speed, we can see here, is just long enough for the ice and spray to be coming up. We get this spray hitting across it. So it's not a super fast shutter speed. It's not captured the icy water in frozen droplets. There's a smear across the picture. So again, this sense of a wonderful capturing the moment, capturing a moment. They're brushing the ice as the next stone comes in, and they're trying to speed up and smooth out the stone as it's sort of moving towards its target. So very much that notion of the story going on here. We capture this moment in the story. Right. Bear with me one sec. And okay, Keith says the sky planters image shows how hard it is to differentiate narrative from documentary photography. Well, okay, it's a good point, Keith. I would say the thing is that this, whilst we do tend to create genres, we'll say landscape, portrait, architectural photography, the reality is there's always overlap. And when I talk about so a lot of documentary photography can be narrative. I suppose narrative is something that can apply to almost any genre for photography. You can have narrative portraits, you can have narrative architecture, narrative landscape. You can create it's not my speciality is portraits, and I say narrative photography, but it's narrative with people, because people are my speciality. You could certainly have narrative animal photography. I think narrative is really that notion of the story. Documentary can kind of vary. So you can have you might decide that you're just documenting the fact that you have this interesting shaped mug or an interesting lamp. These things really are then documentary, which are overlapping really almost with product photography. So maybe you're documenting that you've got this mug, or maybe you're trying to sell this mug, and so you're showing this mug off in its best light. So it's a kind of documentary, but there's not really much of what you would call a narrative to it. There's not really a story to it. If you think about a mug, you could take a photo of a mug, and there it is. Okay, let's take this glass then. I've got a glass of water sitting next to me. So you can take a photo of the glass. Now, And if there's nothing in the glass and it's on a white sheet, it's just a photo of a glass. Is there a story to it? Not much. If there's water in it, well, that's starting to add something in. But maybe there could be other things in it. Maybe there could be some kind of fizzy juice. Maybe there could be a cocktail. If there was a little cocktail umbrella hanging out of it and a straw, you might then assume that there's something a lot more going on in a mug, which, considering it's a pint glass, would be maybe a bit surprising. Then maybe what about if this was sitting next to something? If this was sitting on a bar in a pub, you would then start to look at it slightly different. What if it zoomed in? You can see that it's sitting on a bar, but there's a hand holding it. Is it a young hand or an old hand, a male hand, a female hand? All these things now dramatically change how you view the glass, what you think the glass is being used for, what's going to happen next, how that glass is interacting with a wider environment. And that then is where you are moving away from product and overlapping into narrative. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Rosemary says, in thinking about collections, the ability of these narrative type photos carry so much weight in conveying a sense of time, place and emphasis. Important to remember even with a family album. I think this is very true, and photographs, the value of photographs change over time as well. When we take a photo at the time, it does tend to be more documentary. As time moves on though, these photos become more valuable. So we take a photo of our child at school sports day, and that's a fun photo of the day. 10 years later, we look back at that photo of our child from sports day and we remember how young they were and how young we were and how different the world seemed 10 years ago. 40 years from now, the grandchildren are looking back at this photo of their parents when they were small. 60 years from now, 100 years from now, these photos are invaluable. They have a totally different sense of documenting a time and a sense of narrative. So that notion of narrative does change through time. So this becomes, I think, part of the really interesting idea of narrative in photography, and thinking about competitions and thinking about, if you were to take photos now that you would like to be part of a collection, what kind of things become important? And maybe photos of people become more important or feel more important than just place. That's not necessarily true. You know, I mean, a picture of a high street can look really interesting 100 years from now. How much has that high street changed? But I think that high street with people in it, and then not just how much has the high street changed, but how much of the people and the high street changed, I think creates an even more interesting one. So thanks for that comment, Rosemary. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more. This one is called The Day's Work Begins, and I think to recap on Pat's work, oh look, it's the women doing the work. So The Day's Work Begins, this is by Charles Trampas, taken around 1937. So just coming off the tram, baskets being laden up. Well, again, I'm not totally sure. Is this woman unloading her basket before she gets on the tram, or are the other two already loaded up and she's the third one to be loaded up? Now, this kind of carrying, again, is something we don't tend to see these days. And even the trams, whilst there might be modern trams kicking about, we don't tend to see trams like this either. So you really get that sense of a world past. But in terms of even at the time, this becomes a narrative photo, because you know, we've got this sense of, well, it's called The Day Begins, it's not called The Day Ends. So we've got this sense of these people who, this is their job, this is the start of their day, their work. It's heavy, laborious. These straps, I don't envy them, I'm sure very few of us would. But it becomes fascinating. We can't just, you can't scroll past it at high speed, a photo like this. There's lovely bits of composition in this as well. I'm going to talk more about composition tomorrow night, so do make sure you tune in for that. Okay, another photo then. If we're talking narrative, this one has been used widely to publicise the McKinnon Collection on display at the Kirkcudbright galleries at the moment, and isn't it so beautiful? I mean, given the fact that this is Morning Prayers at Gorbals Primary School, Glasgow, 1943. So 1943, how old are these children? Maybe 6 years old, something like that. So born 1937, so what are we talking about? Roughly, most of these kids here, any who are still alive, will be well into their 80s. Okay, so, but as we look, that little innocence of childhood, but also the playfulness of childhood, the different way, they're obviously, there you go, morning prayers. This kid on the right here isn't bothering to put his hands together. This one on the left, he's put his hands down the way. He's maybe, it doesn't really look like he's into it. He looks like he's kind of running his own thought. The kid behind, he's got his eyes really quite tightly shut. He's like kind of squeezing them together. This one here, his mouth is quite determined and set. But this is all eyes go to the wee boy at the front, who is absolutely, glory to the divine. And in contrast to those around him, head back, sincerity oozing, just absolutely grabs our attention. And we can't help but be absolutely drawn into this photo. That it's not just a documentary photo of a bunch of kids sitting telling their prayers. There's the intense emotional content of this, which is what's really driving the narrative in this photo. Wonderful, wonderful image. Okay. One more photo I want to show you, and then I'm going to just remind you a little bit about the competition. But this, if we're talking narrative photography, and not one that's been set up particularly for the camera, this one has to be my favourite of all time. And this is the ferry boat at the Kyle of Loch Alsh. So, what do we reckon? Sometime between the 1870s and 1880s, taken by George Washington Wilson. So 150-ish years ago, long before the bridge to Skye was built, long before mechanised ferries were running backwards and forwards across what can be quite a treacherous channel, you have the ferry rowboat. And in this rowboat, we have a wagon, we have a caravan, looking incredibly precarious. And they've obviously, it's tied, the boat is tied. We can see the ropes tied here. We can see a little ramp here, or bits of wood there where, so the caravan is strapped in tightly. We can see a woman sitting here. Could she be holding a wee baby in her arms? Quite possibly, because there's a little lad tucked in behind here. And it looks so precarious. We've got it's a sailboat to get across what can be an incredibly treacherous stretch of water. And this guy with his oar, ready to go. This man here, big beard, fob watch chain coming down, walking back the way. Maybe he's been helping get everything strapped in and set up. My job is done. I'm going back to get a cup of tea now. Is it going to be the lad who's going to be steering it across? Is it going to be somebody else who's going to join him? Maybe somebody's out. I just find this so powerful. If we're talking about that sense of what's come before, you get this feeling of a big story. What's going to come next? We have no idea. Captured beautifully, the snow on the hills on the mountains, the sky in the background there. This is a winter scene as well. So this, if we're talking narrative, this for me is like the ultimate in the narrative photo. If I saw this as the poster for a film, I would want to watch the film. If this was the cover of a book, I would want to read the book. It is absolutely engaging. This isn't just a snapshot of a caravan, of a jetty, of a boat, of a picture of sky in the background. This is a whole deep, powerful story. So hopefully then what I've managed to do here is give you a sense of narrative of what storytelling photography is. Okay, a couple more comments here. Rosemary says, I adore that photo of the children at morning prayer, delightful on so many levels. John says the photo of the kids would stand out in any time period. Absolutely would. Pat says, wonderful work with the background. wonderful photo with the background of the mountains. So that's the one we've just been talking about. And Roy, having a little dig at Pat, says, "Oh look, the men are doing the work." Keith says, "Totally agree with your comments on the Washington Wilson image. Are you going to mention or discuss on your work the Fishing Faces project?" Fishing Faces, I wasn't intending to, Keith, not on this one. I might keep that back for my own podcast at some point in the future. There's probably not enough time to discuss that in these particular podcasts. For anybody who's interested, I regularly run every Sunday at 3 p.m. UK time. I have my own podcast called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, where if you're interested in developing your photography, come along and watch that. But meantime, these ones are specifically, this is about the Kirkcudbright. This is, you can see here, there we go, Kirkcudbright galleries. So hopefully now I've given you this idea, a sense of what narrative is. And narrative in photography is the starting point for interesting photos. Even before we get to composition, even before we get to lighting, the story, what's the story? Why should anybody bother taking a few seconds or a few minutes or longer out of their life to look at your photo? If you're creating a photo, you are trying to convey something. You want to convey an emotion, a moment, a concept, an idea, so that when somebody looks at that photo, something of that is transferred to them. That's really what the narrative is about. Even a slightly blurry, not fully in focus, not perfectly lined up photo, if the narrative is strong enough, you can kind of get away with it. Now, obviously on a technical level, great if you can get it in focus and you can get the horizon straight and everything else first as well. Then, that's what you're after. But if you can't, but first and foremost, get the story. You can have all the technicals you like, but if you don't have a good story, if you don't have a good narrative, what's the point of the photo? And sometimes with photography, we can get so caught up in making sure we've got our camera settings right, if we've got the right aperture, if we've got the right shutter speed, is everything sharply in focus, that we can actually miss the story. So that's the bit that I really wanted to get across this evening, and I'm hoping that you've got a sense of the power of narrative and why it's so important. Over the next 2 evenings, so tomorrow 7:30 UK time, I'm going to be talking about composition techniques. So why actually with some of these photos, like you had the butcher kind of standing in the center, but when you look at this picture of the boat about to go across the sky, it's off center. Would it have had as much power if it was sitting in the middle of the photo? What happens when you have when your dominant lines are diagonal rather than upright? There are a whole bunch of compositional techniques that you can use that can really improve the power of the narrative that you're trying to get across. We can tell a story, but then how we tell that story, how we design that story within the photo can make a huge difference. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about composition, and then on Thursday I'm going to be talking about light, because light can also have tremendous impact on the power of the story. Is the light coming directly, or is it coming from the side, or is it bounced off something else, or is there a light coming from behind? These in turn can have a powerful impact on your photo. So I do hope you will have time to tune in to those. In the meantime, if this has got you thinking, yes, I would like to take part, there is a competition for the Kirkcudbright galleries. Go to kirkcudbrightgalleries.org.uk. I will, if it isn't already in the description, I will make sure it's in the description of this video and subsequent videos. Look for the competition. There's all the terms and conditions and the submission form. But basically what we're looking for is photos of Kirkcudbright and its surrounding area. And we're thinking of, and what we're trying to do is create a Kirkcudbright collection. And this collection will then go on display later in the year at the Kirkcudbright galleries. So put your images in. We're putting a maximum limit of 3 per person. There's 2 categories, there's under 18s and over 18s, so if you happen to know anybody else who you think might be interested, certainly any under 18s as well, let them know about the competition as well. Spread the word. Closing date is 5 p.m. on February the 28th, that's 5 p.m. UK time. Right, last thing then, for anybody, if you've enjoyed this, if you found it interesting, if you would like to help with, it's useful for Kirkcudbright Galleries to get a little bit of feedback. In the description, you will find a link to a response form. It will take you literally no more than 30 to 45 seconds to fill in. You don't have to worry about sticking your email address in, but if you can tick little boxes which say who you are, whether you enjoyed this, that kind of thing, to be able to get the response and feedback, that's incredibly useful. I can see we've got a last couple of comments here. Oh, Robert's from Texas says, hi, sorry I was late. It's okay, you've come in at the end, Robert. You will be able to sort of rewind this and watch it from the beginning. Rosemary says, excellent motivating description of what makes a photograph a narrative. Thank you for that. Helps prioritise her efforts. I'm glad you found it useful, and thank you for letting me know you did, Rosemary. Meg says she's really enjoyed the podcast. And Diane says, very interesting chat. Have learnt a lot. Hope I remember tomorrow's. Composition is so important, we need to understand it. Oh, Jim says, thanks for an interesting podcast. Great. Well, this is fantastic. Really hope you've enjoyed. And like I say, please tune in tomorrow evening and find out more. And I will show you more photos from the collection, but we'll be looking at them this time in terms of the notion of composition. How have they laid them out, and what's, why do they become so engaging? Because of just the way the lines are, the way our eyes get drawn into the photo. And Shona from the Kirkcudbright Gallery says, thank you, Kim, from all of us at the Kirkcudbright Galleries. It's a pleasure to work with you. Pleasure to work with you too. Thank you. Right. So, that's us. I do hope you've enjoyed it, and I will hopefully, so if I can find the right buttons here, that's the one I want. Great. Okay, I will see you tomorrow evening. Take care. Good night.